students. So today we have to start with the cell cycle. So cell cycle, for cell cycle one statement is given, that is divide, grow and redivide. So when a cell is divided into two daughter cells, these two daughter cells will grow, and after growing these two daughter cells will again redivide and form the four daughter cells. Okay, so that is why a statement for cell cycle is what? A cell divides, it grows and again it divides. So what is the definition of cell cycle? Cell cycle is a series of events taking place in a cell as it grows and divides. So cell cycle is a series of events which will take place inside the cell, in which the cell will grow and it will divide. So cell cycle, it is the series of events. Cell cycle is the series of events which occurs inside a cell, in which the cell will grow and the cell will divide. In a cell cycle, the cell spends most of the time in a phase, and that phase is known as interphase. Inter, it means in between. Okay, so a newly formed cell is there and a cell has to divide now. In between that phase, that is known as interphase. A newly formed cell after cell division is there. This cell will, after growth, this cell will undergo the process of cell division and it will form the two daughter cells. So this phase in between a newly formed cell to the dividing cell which will be forming the two daughter cell, this phase is known as interphase. Okay, inter, it means in between. So the phase between the newly formed cells and the cells ready for the division into two daughter cells, that phase is known as interphase. Okay, IP. In this phase is very important. Most of the time a cell spends in its interphase, because in this phase the cell will grow, the cell will replicate its genetic material, that is chromosome, and the cell will get ready for the cell division. Okay, once the cell leaves this interphase, it will undergo the mitotic phase, M phase. Okay, in which the cell will divide into two daughter cells by a series of events again, that is karyokinesis and cytokinesis. Kinesis, it means division, and this kinesis word is derived from a protein. Okay, this kinesis, karyokinesis, karyo term is derived from karyon. Karyon, it means nucleus. So first the division of nucleus occurs and then the division of cytoplasm occurs in the mitotic phase or M phase of the cell cycle. So you must have understood now, cell cycle is a series of events which occurs inside a cell, in which the cell will grow and divide. A cell will spend most of the time in a phase, and that phase is known as interphase. And what happens in this phase? The cell will grow, the cell will replicate its genetic material, and the cell gets ready for the cell division. Once the cell leaves this interphase, now the cell is undergoing through the M phase or the mitotic phase, in which the cell will complete its division by the two subsequent steps, that is karyokinesis and cytokinesis. Karyokinesis is the division of nucleus and cytokinesis is the division of cytoplasm into two daughter cells. Now the phases of cell cycle. Cell cycle is composed of the following phases. First phase is the interphase and second phase is the mitotic phase. In certain cases there is G0 phase, which is the exceptional one, because very few cells undergo this G0 phase. Okay, so in the interphase itself, that is in the first G1 phase itself, the cell will decide either it has to go to the mitotic phase, or it does want to go to the G0 phase. Once the cell has entered the G0 phase, it will not go under the process of division. So in the G1 phase of the interphase only, the cells decides whether it will continue the process of division or it will be going to the G0 phase, where it will not undergo the process of cell division, like the neuron cells. So neuron cells in the embryonic stage only, it undergoes after the brain development is completed in the embryo, the neurons undergoes the G0 phase of the cell cycle. So later on in the life, this neuron never divides and never undergoes the M phase of the cell cycle, neither the S or G2 or the M phase of the cell cycle. Okay. So that is why it is said that you must have to take care of the most delicate organ of your body, that is brain. And a very hard protective covering is around the brain, that is skull. The interphase is the phase of the cell. So now we have to start with the first phase of the cell cycle. And what is the first phase? That is the interphase. It is a typical phase in which the cell spends most of its time. Maximum time a cell will spend in which phase? That is interphase. Okay. During this phase, the cell will copy its DNA and it will get ready for mitosis. And why it need to copy its DNA? So that the two daughter cells will get the same amount of DNA as in the parent cell. Okay. If the parent cell is having 2 chromosomes, the two daughter cells should also get 2 chromosomes. So that is why these 2 chromosomes will replicate itself and it will form a duplicate copy of DNA or chromosome, so that the two daughter cells will get the equal amount of chromosomes in the division. In this interphase, the cell gets ready for mitosis or meiosis. Then why this interphase is also known as resting phase? This interphase is also known as resting phase because no change is observed in the chromosomes, or externally no changes are observed in the chromosomes even through the microscopes. So that is why this interphase is also known as resting phase. So it may certain time come for the reasoning based question. Okay, why interphase is also known as resting phase? Because externally there is no changes observed in the chromosome even under the microscope. Now the phases of interphase. During interphase, the cell acquires the nutrients, because when a cell has divided into two daughter cells, these two daughter cells will have the divided nucleus and all the cell organelles, but the cytoplasm is very less. Okay, here also the cytoplasm is very less. So that is why the cell will acquire nutrients, creates and uses its proteins and other molecules, and it will get ready for the cell division. Interphase is divided into 3 subphases, that is G1 phase, S phase and G2 phase. G1 it means gap 1 phase, S phase it means synthesis phase, G2 it means gap 2 phase. Okay. Now here is the cyclic events of cell cycle. So from here to here, this is interphase and this is the M phase. In interphase, there are 3 subphases: G1 phase, S phase and G2 phase. In the G1 phase only, the cell will either decide to go to G0 phase, and once the cell has entered to the G0 phase, it will withdraw itself from the cell cycle and it will never divide. Okay, and if it does not undergo the G0 phase, then the cell will continue the next phase of interphase, that is S phase, and then cell will enter into the G phase, and then the cell will enter into the M phase. In the M phase, there is two subphases, nuclear division and cytoplasmic division. Nuclear division is known as karyokinesis and cytoplasmic division is known as cytokinesis. Okay, so from the next classes, we will discuss about the events or changes taking place in the G1, S and G2 phase. This is all for today. Thank you everyone.